The grand chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with quiet murmurs, the air thick with an air of self-assured superiority. Delegates from across the galaxy sat in their ornate seats, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Multi-limbed Tsar clicking their mandibles, the crystalline Ilari shimmering under the chamber's glow, and the ever-imposing Vraxen, their reptilian eyes sharp with predatory focus. At the heart of the assembly, a heated discussion was already underway. The Vraxen ambassador, clad in ceremonial warplate, stood tall. His voice a guttural growl that echoed through the hall. "Humans are unfit for this council," he declared, his clawed hand slicing through the air with finality. "They cower at the mere mention of war. Look at them. Their worlds are filled with protests against battle, cries for peace, and pathetic calls for diplomacy. These are not the traits of a species worthy of standing among us." There were nods of agreement from several delegates. The tall, avian Krell ambassador flicked his feathers dismissively. "Indeed, Ambassador Vraxen. Strength is a currency this council values, and it seems humanity is bankrupt. Their refusal to engage in honorable combat speaks for itself." Several screens around the chamber flickered to life, displaying carefully curated clips of human protests. Crowds gathered in streets holding signs with slogans like, "No more war" and "Peace, not bloodshed." Footage of world leaders discussing disarmament and denuclearization was played in slow motion, each frame reinforcing the council's perception. "They seek peace, yes," hissed the Vraxen, his lip curling in disdain. "But peace is sought only by the weak." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Tell me, council members, have you ever seen a predator beg for peace?" The chamber erupted in low, rumbling agreement. The room quieted as a soft chime echoed through the hall. All eyes turned toward the council entrance. Slowly, deliberately, the human ambassador entered. He was unassuming, garbed in a simple black suit with a sharp silver pin on his chest, the emblem of Earth. He moved without hesitation, eyes scanning the chamber, his gaze unwavering. No guards, no entourage, just him. "Ah, the human finally arrives," sneered the Vraxen, his grin full of sharp, jagged teeth. "Have you come to plead your case, little prey?" Laughter rippled through the room, quiet but undeniable. The human ambassador did not react. He walked with measured calm, each step a metronome of control, until he reached the speaking platform. He stood there for a moment, letting silence fill the air. It stretched uncomfortably long, forcing every being in the room to pay attention. "I have heard your words," the ambassador said, his voice steady but cold. It wasn't loud, but it carried, cutting through the quiet like the edge of a blade. "And I see now that you mistake mercy for fear." His gaze swept across the chamber, pausing on each of the most vocal delegates, his eyes sharp, calculating. "That is an error you should correct swiftly." A wave of discontent passed through the chamber. Murmurs, scoffs, and disbelieving chuckles echoed around him. The Vraxen let out a bark of a laugh. "You call it mercy. You beg for peace because you know war would break you." He leaned forward, claws tapping the edge of his podium. "Admit it, human. You lack the resolve to wage true war. Your kind is soft." The ambassador tilted his head ever so slightly. His eyes narrowed as he gazed directly at the Vraxen. "You speak of war as if you understand it," he said softly. "But you do not." He stepped forward, and his shadow stretched behind him like a storm front. "You play at war. Ritualized skirmishes, symbolic victories, controlled losses, honor duels and border disputes. Is that what you call war?" He let the words linger, each syllable deliberate. "You have never known war." Several council members exchanged uneasy glances. The Krell ambassador's feathers ruffled. "Careful, human," he warned. "You forget your place." The ambassador turned his gaze to the Krell. "No," he said quietly, his eyes like cold steel. "I have not forgotten. But perhaps it is time you remembered yours." His eyes swept the room again, pausing once more on the Vraxen. His voice, calm yet unyielding, rang out. You claim that we fear war. No. His hands folded behind his back. His stance as still as stone. We do not fear war. We understand it. The silence was absolute now. No one dared speak. We know its cost. We know its weight. The screams of the dying. The wails of children left without parents. The scent of fire and blood in the air. We know it better than any of you. And that is why we do not seek it. The room was still. Too still. Even the hum of the chamber's energy field seemed to fade. You think fear of war is weakness, he continued. His voice colder now. It is not. It is strength. The strength to know that just because you can destroy something does not mean you should. It is restraint, discipline, control. His eyes locked onto the Vraxen once more, and his next words cut deeper than any blade. Control that you clearly lack. The Vraxen ambassador's eyes widened, his lips curling into a snarl. Watch your tongue, human. His voice was low, dangerous. Do not mistake your words for armor. If you provoke us, you may find yourself without allies. Provoke. The ambassador raised an eyebrow, genuine curiosity in his voice. Do you think I'm trying to provoke you? He shook his head slowly. If I wanted to provoke you, Ambassador Vraxen, you would already know. His gaze didn't waver, didn't blink. I am offering you a warning, one you should heed. The Tsar delegate clicked its mandibles thoughtfully. This human speaks in riddles, it muttered, its multifaceted eyes glinting. If you do not fear war, then what do you fear? The ambassador's eyes flicked to the Tsar, then to the Vraxen, then to the entire council. He let out a long, quiet breath. Slowly, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of the podium. His voice dropping just low enough that they all had to lean in to hear it. We fear what happens when the restraint breaks. The chamber grew colder, as if something unseen had passed through it. No one spoke. Not a breath. Not a cough. Even the Vraxen remained silent, his claws slowly curling inward. You asked if we fear war, the ambassador said softly. We do not. But you should. He straightened, eyes colder than the void. Because we are very, very good at it. A heavy stillness hung in the chamber. No one spoke, but the silence was more oppressive than any roar of argument. Every delegate's gaze remained fixed on the human ambassador, their eyes filled with something new, caution, suspicion, but fear. Well, not yet. The Vraxen ambassador leaned back in his seat, his clawed fingers drumming rhythmically on the stone surface before him. His eyes remained locked on the human. Slowly, deliberately, he let out a dry, rasping chuckle. A fine performance, human, he said, his sharp teeth glinting under the chamber's light. You've told us many tales of your brutality, your history of destruction. But words are easy. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to cold, predatory slits. Show us. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, but none interrupted. The challenge had been issued, and now all eyes returned to the human. The ambassador didn't flinch. He remained still for a moment, letting the weight of the Vraxen's demand settle in the air. Then, with a calm, steady breath, he spoke. You want proof. His eyes met the Vraxen's, unblinking. Fine. I'll give you proof. He took a step forward, his voice colder now, his tone sharper. How many wars have you fought, Ambassador Vraxen? How many species have you conquered? The Vraxen bared his teeth in a mock grin. 47 campaigns. 32 victories. 7 species brought into submission. His tone was filled with pride. Our legacy stretches across the stars. 47 campaigns, the ambassador repeated, as if tasting the words. He let them hang in the air for a moment longer. Do you know how many wars humanity has fought? He glanced at the other ambassadors. We don't have a precise number. Records were lost. Whole civilizations within our own world wiped each other out before anyone could even count them. He turned his gaze back to the Vraxen, his eyes like frozen steel. But it's more than 47. I can promise you that. The Vraxen's smile faltered ever so slightly. We didn't conquer worlds, the ambassador continued, his voice steady as a metronome. We conquered ourselves. Kingdoms, empires, nations. All of them rose and fell in blood and fire. Every inch of progress came at the cost of war. Every border, every government, every system of order we have now was forged in the crucible of conflict. You boast of campaigns. We have fought eras. The crystalline Ilari pulsed with dim violet light, a signal of unease. Conquering oneself is one thing, but that is not the same as fighting an external threat. Its voice was like the chime of a distant bell. A predator that has never hunted another is still prey. The ambassador turned his gaze to the Ilari. We've had predators, he said quietly. More than you could count. He raised a hand, fingers splayed. Famine, plague, natural disasters, enemies from within. And yes, enemies from beyond. His eyes shifted to meet each ambassador's gaze. Every species here believes they are the apex predator of their world. You look at us and think they are soft. They are fragile. But you don't understand. We did not rise because we were the strongest. We rose because we were relentless. He let his hand fall to his side, his posture straight as an iron rod. The apex predator doesn't win because it's the strongest. It wins because it adapts, endures. It finds a way, no matter the cost. His eyes locked on the Vraxen. We always find a way. The Tsar ambassador clicked its mandibles thoughtfully, its multifaceted eyes shimmering as it processed the human's words. Endurance is admirable, it admitted, its voice slow and deliberate. But persistence alone does not win wars. Precision does. Correct, the ambassador replied without hesitation. Persistence alone isn't enough. Precision alone isn't enough either. You need both. He gestured toward the holographic displays, still frozen on images of human warfare. Every war you see, there was a lesson. Every loss, every mistake, every failure, we learn from them all. Adaptation is not passive. It is active. We change. We improve. We evolve. His voice grew sharper, like the tightening of a wire. How much have you evolved, Ambassador Vraxen? How much have any of you evolved since you claimed your place in this chamber? There was a shift in the air. A subtle one, but undeniable. The Krell's feathers puffed slightly, its voice sharp with skepticism. You claim your evolution is superior, but you rely on history. The past is not the present. You have not fought us. The ambassador's eyes shifted to the Krell, and for a moment, it was as if he was looking through him. You think you want to fight us, the ambassador said softly. You don't. He took another step forward, his presence pressing down on the room like the weight of a storm. We don't fight like you. We don't fight for glory or honor. We don't fight for territory. We fight for survival. That is the difference. He raised a hand and pointed directly at the Vraxen. When you go to war, you think about victory. You think about your banners, your songs, your warriors standing proud. His hand dropped. When we go to war, we think about one thing only, ending it. His voice grew colder with each word. There is no glory in war. No pride. No parades. It is dirty. It is brutal. It is filled with mistakes. But we do not stop. Not until it is over. He stared hard at the Vraxen, his eyes twin points of frozen steel. Not until you are over. The Vraxen ambassador's lips curled in a snarl, his claws pressing hard enough against the table to leave shallow gouges. You talk as if you are inevitable. As if you are invincible. Invincible. The ambassador shook his head, his eyes narrowing. Oh, we bleed. We break. We fall. But that's the thing about us, Ambassador Vraxen. He took one more step forward, his shadow cast long over the Vraxen's podium. His eyes met the ambassador's, his gaze unyielding. You can break us, burn us, shatter everything we build. But no matter how many times you think we're finished, No matter how certain you are that we're done. His eyes hardened to something beyond anger, beyond resolve. Always. The Vraxan said nothing. For a moment, it seemed as though he might strike, his claws tensing, his shoulders coiled with energy. But he didn't move. Not yet. The ambassador continued, his voice like a slow march of distant thunder. I know how you see us. Fragile. But that's your mistake. The small don't survive by being weak. The soft don't endure centuries of war. And fragile things don't stand in front of you, unarmed, and tell you to your face that you should be afraid. The chamber was silent. Every breath was held. Every eye on him. The ambassador's gaze shifted slowly across the room. We do not want war. But if you bring it to us, know this. His voice dropped to a quiet, lethal calm. We will not stop. We will not surrender. We will not negotiate for mercy. He looked directly at the Vraxan one final time. And when it's over, Ambassador Vraxan, you will not sing songs of glory. He let the words hang in the air like smoke from a battlefield. There will be no honor in your defeat. No tales of bravery. Just silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The Vraxan ambassador leaned back slowly. His eyes narrowed with something deeper than anger. His claws tapped softly, one after another, on the edge of his podium. You're different from the last ambassador we met. The human didn't flinch. I know,